Aloha, this is me, MarkO, talking, and I welcome you to Dances with Dragons, a Green Heart Foundation podcast. In this podcast, you will hear about my real-life stories and adventures, together with the exciting current projects of our Green Heart Foundation. So, sit back, relax, and get ready to listen. Welcome back, and we're ready for some new adventures, some new stories, so sit back, relax, and open your ears and your hearts to the new tales of Dances with Dragons, because this is an important country and part of my life as I'm getting ready to enter Afghanistan. And as you know, I spent a month plus going through Iran and realizing that Afghanistan was the source of one of the other incredible, well sought after, popular jewelry stones set for jewelry, lapis lazuli, which is mined in Afghanistan. And I was on a quest to build a hopeful jewelry business. So I'm quickly leaving Iran now. And I recall that my money was dwindling. And just to give you all an idea of the costs of travel way back in the day, and we're talking the 1970s, heaven forbid, people were still alive back then. But these were the final months of the Vietnam War, which is very important to me, as I clearly had told you in earlier discussions and talks, that I did not want to support the Vietnam War, support the U.S. government because of the war. And so it was quite the joyous day when I ended up in Sri Lanka, which is coming up shortly after Afghanistan, that the Vietnam War ended on April 25, 1975. But this is now springtime, and I was traveling almost 1 month in Iran, quickly leaving the border of Iran into a small little region of Baluchistan, the incredibly dangerous parts of southern Pakistan, bordering Afghanistan on one side and India on the other, was heavily fortified by fighters, freedom fighters, becoming known as the Mujahideen, and also the fighters that were gathering, preparing for unfortunate events in the future where terrorism was being cultivated, let's say. But it was also the home of opium production in southern Pakistan and all over Afghanistan, actually. The cultivation of the poppies, manufacturing of opium, sticky paste of opium. And I'm now entering that realm, and very common and popular for the local people to be smoking. That's just what they did. Tobacco and cigarettes were expensive, and if anything, like the Europeans did, they would mix some hashish with tobacco, or even marijuana was mixed with tobacco, and it was smoked like a cigarette, commonly, would be passed around to a group of friends. And I'm now traveling on these local buses and just getting high, breathing the air, as the windows are basically no windows at all, and everything just kind of filters through the bus, and the weft of hashish filling the air. And so I kept a journal every day, every dollar, every penny, every paisa, every rupee expense. And I started looking at my budget dwindling, the little money I had left after my major investment with the Persian carpet purchase in Tehran, Iran. And I realized that in the month that I had been traveling through Iran, including hotels, buses, transportation, food costs, all expenses, I spent $21 surviving for a month. And so clearly less than $1 a day And to put that in perspective, I recall the famous travel book. There were very few travel books, travel guide books in the day, but the Fodder's travel adventure books, country by country, had been coming out, and they had a book for Europe, see Europe, travel in Europe, $5 a day. So if you can imagine $5 a day to live in Europe, extremely expensive, of course, compared to I was less than $1 a day, that put things in a good perspective. But still my money was dwindling. And there was no way I was going to be making money until I realized I've got to get back to the Western culture, Europe and or Canada, the States, and continue with my business ventures, jewelry. And as you'll soon hear, I started getting into the bag business in Afghanistan. So I was living very simply. I was starting to literally barter my clothes away and take on the local kaftans, the local robes and sandals and clothes of the local people that I was living with, and quickly got in and out of Pakistan. I had to go through Quetta, which is the southernmost town, the largest town in southern Pakistan. Very, very dangerous. Just talk about shady looking people, even in the daytime. There was just a lot of illegal drug business because, of course, it was tolerated to cultivate the poppies in Pakistan and Afghanistan. It was a major business. It funded major wars. It was a big reason why the following year the Russians came in and realized that they can monopolize Afghanistan by taking it over politically and control the opium and poppy production and opium business, which becomes morphine, heroin, and the strongest pain-killing drugs on the planet. So I skipped literally in and out of Pakistan, and I was on the bus, if you can call it a bus, loaded with more people and animals and produce on my way into Afghanistan. Of course, the bus continually breaking down like the buses I was on in the central and eastern part of Iran. After I leave the main cities, it's just traveling in whatever transport the locals travel in on roads that aren't yet roads because it's just tracks out in the desert somewhere. And I remember getting into Kandahar, Afghanistan, in the middle of the night, no electricity, and it was just deeply enchanting. It was mysterious. There was a smell of hashish everywhere in the air, smell of exotic spices, and no electricity. So people were just literally, some had lanterns, the shopkeepers had lanterns out, oil lanterns in front of their shops, and I was following the people getting off the bus, loaded up my backpack full of, as you recall, pistachio nuts, and I'm heading somewhere to find a place to sleep. And it was the local hotel that definitely didn't cost more than 40-50 cents a night. And I was being checked in and shown by the night man down this long corridor. And I just recall years later when the Eagles' famous song Hotel California came out, I believe around 1977. This is 75, but my trips traveling in and out of these small, remote, dingy border towns always reminded me of these hotels you check into where you're no electricity and you're wandering down dark hallways and upstairs, and God knows where they're going to show you to a room that hopefully is the better room than the standard room that they cram 10 people in for the Afghanis or local people. I wanted my own room, of course, and being shown down the corridors, there were always voices and drinking, even though it was Muslim countries. There were lots of activities going on through the night, music playing. They loved their music. But I realized that it was time to pull myself together and get on another bus to go up to Kabul. And that's where I was hearing one could get the very good lapis lazuli, which I wanted to start building a collection of stones, semi-precious and soon to be a few precious stones, to start designing jewelry and starting my first entrepreneurial business as a traveling hippie. And so I realized that these beautiful lapis stones I was seeing around were actually a little bit pricey. There were different qualities. Of course, I began learning the different qualities, but I heard there was a lot more business, a lot more quantity, a lot more product in Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan. And so I realized, well, I'm on my trip, first time in a really deeply exotic, enchanting land. Iran, because the Shah at the time, who was in the process of being deposed, 1974-75, the Shah of Iran was deposed, and I had mentioned Khomeini, one of the religious leaders, took over the country and basically shut it down and basically closed it down to Westerners and capitalism. And I was enchanted with Afghanistan since a quick story, since a young age. So I get to Kabul. I remember the hotel was the Green Hotel, and the hotels in Afghanistan were famous for these outdoor courtyards, big sprawling grassy areas that didn't have a lot of grass, but because of lack of water. But they had grounds, they were called, and the back gardens were just full of tables and Westerners sitting around smoking hashish all day, all night, drinking cheap Rakshi, the cheap local production moonshine whiskey, and cheap beers, which were horrible. No refrigeration virtually. So you're drinking warm, horrible beer, getting stoned all the time. And that was my time. I'm now getting social. I'm catching up on all the news that I hadn't gotten for the past month and a half that I've been traveling through Iran, into South Pakistan, and now Kandahar, Afghanistan, and Kabul. When I started going around to the jewel gem areas and the shops that had actually the lapis lazuli, which were usually a jeweler's store, I recall that, this seems rather expensive. I can get a grouping of these stones for, $10, $15, and different sizes I had learned from Iran, and my good buddy Ali teaching me about what's good for making jewelry. And I started getting close to a few of the merchants, the shop owners, and lo and behold, when I told them what I wanted to do, that I'm buying for a jewelry business that I want to build, so I hope you'll give me wholesale prices. I'm not just here like a tourist buying a stone to put into a ring. I want 100 stones to put into 100 rings and necklaces and bracelets. And so when I told them that I had beautiful Persian turquoise, I remember one shop in particular. I do not recall the name of the merchant, the owner, but he asked me to come back and bring him some of the turquoise that I had from Iran, the Persian turquoise. I did this faithfully, and lo and behold, he said, well, I'll barter with you. I'll trade. How about you take some of my lapis and I'll take some of your Persian turquoise? And I had, I believe, well over 100, 130 different sizes of Persian turquoise from my overalls primarily, and anything else that Ali could get off of me. And so I'm now bartering in Asian countries where they barter for subsistence to get more of a supply of precious or semi-precious stones, and in particular lapis. I recall wandering around. It was basically go from one restaurant to the next place to get stoned, to get smoothies, to get special kebabs or the special Afghani naan breads cooked in the stone ovens. And I recall a couple of the famous restaurants that a lot of the Westerners gathered at. And I realized I had been a bit lonely, obviously, because I wanted to be around and hear Western stories and just getting my dose of Westernization. And I recall vividly meeting some guys that were at a big table, and they looked kind of better off than the average backpacking traveler. And somehow I am always able to walk up to people, ask about something, and if I'm curious to get to know them. I remember getting to know some of the people at this one table in the back courtyard of a very popular Western style restaurant. And they were doing business in Kabul. And I'm talking to the main guy. He introduces himself as Tom. And I said, well, tell me what kind of business. I'm wanting to start a jewelry business. And he says, oh, we have thought and done a little bit with jewelry. But he says, you know, Afghanistan's famous for its carpets, just like Iran and Pakistan and Turkey. And but they have in particular, because of so many camels throughout the country, they have what's called a saddle bag or a carpet bag that fits over the back of a horse or particularly a camel. And they're a double bag. So you have one compartment on the left side, one compartment on the right, and usually just they would lay over the back of the camel or the horse. I started realizing that if I put a handle, a big thick strap over this, I could carry this. It would be more than just a bag that could be utilized for animal transportation and packaging. So I got my first carpet bag, double-sided camel bag, and it was huge, and it could hold a lot more than my sweetheart Dana's bag that she gave me back in the day. And so I had now a larger bag, a bag that I wanted to make into a bag. And so I began designing bags, and I found other beautiful carpet material that was a little thinner, more supple, that I could have cut and make into a shoulder strap. And I started looking at, my gosh, I could buy these bags, perfect condition, woven just like a carpet is woven. They wove these specifically to be carpet bags, saddle bags for transporting with the animals. And I could get one and pay $3, $4, $5 depending on quality. And I would be able to get a bag, find the strap that matched it nicely. And so I started getting a few of these bags, realizing that I'm sure I could get some money for these kind of bags, and started talking about this with Tom because he had a business where he was making with the local Afghani girls, primarily and women. He started these so-called workshops where he started helping them, teaching them new designs of different carpets, of weaving. The women could crochet and not weave. They would crochet Afghani socks. They were like a mukluk moccasin. And in the 70s, this was so popular that these socks that would come up just below your knee, so they were just very warm, like a mukluk moccasin, something that Eskimo or people living in the cold weather and snow could wear. They had a nice leather sole. They were all knit, woven wool for the whole upper part. And you didn't need shoelaces at all. You would just slide your foot through and put this warm, cozy, beautiful designed pair of shoes on your feet. And Tom had a business doing this where he would bring them back to New York And it turns out the people at the table were his partners. And I ended up getting to know not only Tom, but there was a lovely couple that I got to know, Peter and Diane. Horan was their family name. They were from Montreal, Canada. And another man who was a classic wheeling dealing businessman that I didn't have a lot of trust of, that he was the third partner for the shop doing the imported goods from Afghanistan, mostly these mukluk moccasin shoes. He was in Boston, and Tom had a partner named Joey, and I got to know this whole tribe of people that were all doing business around import export, and I admired this. This is what Ula taught me could be done. I'm now meeting people actually doing it, and they loved Afghanistan. They had a huge house that they could rent for virtually nothing, and they started telling me about the life, which I couldn't believe. You have people to clean your clothes. You have people that go to the market and shop and cook. The ones with kids had built-in nannies living at the house, built-in gardeners. And I just thought, they're living like rich people. And he said, yes, well, in these countries, we are considered rich, but we can do this on a couple $100 a month, the entire house rent, the entire staff. And I thought, gosh, that would be great. And then you start to calculate, even $1 a day, you're spending $30, $40, $50 a month just to stay in a hotel. And here you could get a whole house for double or triple that. And I just started realizing, well, that would be a great thing to consider for my life, to get out of the hotel world and to start setting up base camp, which for some reason I was anticipating would be in the Himalayas. And my ultimate goal before getting to Bhutan, which I was well aware of the cover story of the National Geographic magazine, I wanted to get to Bhutan, but first stop would be Kathmandu. And before that, it turned out that one of the days I'm sitting at these outdoor cafes getting stoned, there were a couple very dark complected guys that looked very Asian, but Asians didn't sit at the tables and have a budget to pay for food and drinks and then stay in a hotel. And I was curious about these guys, and I again was bold enough just go up and I introduced myself, and there was some reason that I wanted to talk with them, but really just curious about why do these guys look so. They had soft features. They were very round faces. They weren't those high cheekbones of the Afghanis, and Indian people, of course, were a mix of all different cultures. So I'm just beginning to identify different people, their cultures, the language they spoke, the accent they have when they speak English. And so I introduced myself, and there are two of these guys. First thing I said, where are you guys from? And they said, well, have you ever heard of Sri Lanka? They said, that's the new name. But he says, we used to be called Ceylon. And I said, oh, they make a famous tea, Ceylon tea. And Ceylon just sounded exotic, Sri Lanka. But I liked Serendip was the original name of Sri Lanka. It was called where serendipity came from. And so Ceylon was the name the British gave it when they took over India right around 1800, and became a major tea growing country, which was entirely an island unto its own off the south coast of Madras, India. And they were much more dark-skinned because they were right on the equator in that region where they had sunshine every day of the year, and they were darker complected. And I started hearing stories of the amazing life of Ceylon, Sri Lanka. And one of the things I noticed is they just simply said, but we're Buddhist. Our country is a Buddhist country. I said, really? Buddhist? Well, I've heard about this country, Bhutan, that's Buddhist, and I knew Nepal was a mix of Hindu and Buddhism. but an entire Buddhist country. But then they started telling me about the coconuts and the beaches and the sunshine. Thank you for listening to Dances with Dragons. I hope you all enjoyed my stories of the adventures of a modern-day Marco Polo. Join us next week to listen to more exciting real-life stories. If you enjoyed our podcast, please leave us a review and share it with others. To learn more about us, please visit our website at greenheartfoundation.org and follow our social media accounts. See you next week.